It started with a storm. Not the kind you hear in the forecast, but the kind that slips in quietly and suddenly consumes everything. Thunder growled like something angry in the sky, and heavy rain pounded against the school windows like fists demanding to be let in. The wind howled down empty hallways, sweeping scattered worksheets across the cold, tiled floors. And in the middle of that chaos, in a school that should have been a place of safety and structure, a little girl sat trembling on the bathroom floor, locked in. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. The overhead light flickered above her like some cruel joke. Every sound outside the door felt distant, muted voices, the click of shoes on linoleum, the muffled bell that signaled the start of her exam. She pressed her small hands to the wooden door, then pounded with what little strength she had. "Hello? Is someone out there? I think I'm locked in. Please let me out. My test's starting." Her voice was hoarse from crying. Her knuckles reddened from banging. No response. Minutes ticked by like hours. She had asked to use the restroom just before the exam. Her nerves had gotten the better of her, and a staff member had escorted her like always. But unlike every other day, this time the door clicked shut and didn't open again. Not after a few seconds. Not after 5 minutes. Not ever. She thought it was just stuck at first, so she tried jiggling the handle, then pushing with both hands, then screaming. But still, nothing. Her body rocked as she sobbed, her tiny voice echoing back at her from the tiled walls. Her wheelchair sat abandoned outside the stall, her crutches too far to reach. She crawled to the base of the door and pushed a hand through the narrow space beneath it. "Please," she whispered. "I have to take my test. I studied. I promise I studied." Back at home, I was just finishing a work call when I saw the time and smiled to myself. She's taking her exam now, I thought. She's probably nervous, but I know she's ready. My little girl, always so brave, so determined, even with her condition, even with the stares, even with the constant battle to just be treated normally, she never gave up. I checked my phone again. No messages, no alerts. So I relaxed, but something felt off. At 11:22 a.m., the school called. The voice on the other end was detached, robotic. "Hi, Mrs. Walker. Just letting you know your daughter didn't show up to her standardized exam today. We're marking her absent." I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. I dropped her off myself. She was so excited. She went in early. Well, the voice continued. Maybe she got sick or left school grounds. We're not sure. But she never arrived at the testing room. My heart stopped. I didn't hang up. I just threw the phone down and ran. The rain hammered down on my windshield as I sped toward the school. My fingers trembled against the wheel. My mind ran through every worst-case scenario imaginable. A car accident, an allergic reaction, a fall down the stairs. What if someone took her? What if she was hurt? By the time I reached the parking lot, I could barely breathe. I sprinted through the front doors, soaked to the bone, and screamed at the receptionist, "Where is my daughter?" No one knew. Or, at least, they pretended not to. Check the nurse's office. Empty. Check the cafeteria. Empty. Maybe she went home early? But I hadn't received any notification. And then, I heard it. A sound that cut through the chaos like a knife. A faint, rhythmic banging, soft but desperate. I followed it. Down the hallway. Past the lockers. Toward the restrooms. And then silence. I threw open the bathroom door, my heart in my throat. There she was, curled into herself. Eyes red. Cheeks streaked with tears. Her palms bruised from pounding. Her exam long over. Her voice nearly gone. She looked up at me and whispered the words that would haunt me forever. "Mommy, they forgot me, but I knew better." Because there was no broken lock. There was no jammed door. Only a neatly turned latch from the outside. And that's when it hit me. They hadn't forgotten her. They had locked her in. On purpose. To make a point. To punish a child for being different. To teach us a lesson that in their perfect little community, there was no room for someone like her. And the worst part? It wasn't an accident. They did it on purpose. We weren't always the type of family people stared at. In fact, before everything happened, we were the quiet ones. The family that baked cookies for the neighborhood block party, waved at joggers every morning, and kept our lawn exactly 2.5 inches like the HOA guidelines stated. We weren't looking for trouble. All we wanted was a peaceful, loving life where our daughter could grow up feeling like the world wasn't already stacked against her. But life doesn't always give you what you want, especially not in neighborhoods that look perfect from the outside but rot from within. My husband David and I moved into Belridge Estates 7 years ago. The brochures promised tranquility, tight knit community vibes, and a school district that boasted the highest test scores in the county. It felt like a good place to raise a child. Safe, structured, clean. Back then, our daughter Sophie was just starting to show signs of her condition. She'd always been a little behind on milestones, but no one could quite explain why. By the time she was 5, we finally had answers: cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia. It meant her legs didn't work the way they were supposed to. It meant wheelchairs, walkers, and physical therapy. It meant constant advocacy and a never-ending uphill battle to give her what every other child got without a second thought. But Sophie? She was fire-wrapped in silk, gentle and kind, but fierce in spirit. She never let her diagnosis define her. While other kids were running on playgrounds, Sophie was memorizing multiplication tables. While they were jumping rope, she was drawing constellations and asking questions about black holes. She loved learning. Books were her safe space, her wings. And school, despite the stairs, and the "why does she walk like that" comments, was her happy place. She worked twice as hard as anyone else just to be included, and yet she did it with a smile that could break your heart wide open. This exam was everything to her. For weeks, she'd been studying flashcards every night, watching educational YouTube videos, timing herself on practice tests. She had a checklist by her bed titled Mission: Crush the State Test. She even drew a cartoon of herself holding a gold trophy labeled, "I did it." That's who she was: hopeful, imaginative, full of drive. All she wanted was a shot, a fair one. But fairness doesn't always exist in communities like Belridge. At first, Belridge Estates felt like a dream. Manicured lawns, smiling neighbors, neatly painted fences. The kind of place where every house had the same shade of beige and everyone acted like they were in a real estate commercial. But under all that polish was a rigid system of control. The HOA ruled everything from your mailbox design to the type of flowers you could plant. It wasn't about community. It was about image. And once Sophie's walker rolled into view, that image started to crack. We started noticing the stares. Subtle at first, the kind where someone looks just a little too long and then forces a fake smile. Then came the comments. "Oh, is she okay to be around other children?" Or, "Maybe this isn't the right environment for someone with special needs." I was stunned. This wasn't some backwoods town. This was supposed to be progressive, inclusive suburban America. But it was all performance, inclusion as long as it didn't inconvenience anyone, tolerance so long as we stayed quiet. Karen was the personification of that hypocrisy. Her real name was Denise Kay Harwood, but everyone called her Karen, even the kids. She was the HOA board president, the self-declared gatekeeper of community values, and the woman who once fined a neighbor for having a sunflower taller than regulation height. She was meticulous, sharp-tongued, and always concerned in the way only people with a superiority complex can be. From the moment Sophie first rolled past her rose bushes, she made her stance clear. She never said anything overtly cruel, at least not at first. It started with suggestions, like maybe you should install a ramp at the back entrance so it's less visible from the street. Or perhaps your daughter would feel more comfortable in a school better equipped for her needs. I tried to ignore her. I really did. But Karen didn't go away. She doubled down. She questioned Sophie's accommodations at HOA meetings, accusing the school of giving her an unfair advantage. She rallied other board members to oppose the installation of a sidewalk ramp near our house because it might cheapen the aesthetic. Once, she even suggested banning wheelchairs from the community pool deck for safety reasons. But the worst part? People agreed with her, quietly, passively, through silence and avoidance. No one stood up for us. Not the neighbors who waved, not the moms who used to invite us to school carpool groups. They just faded away. And Sophie felt it. She wasn't dumb. She could tell when teachers began pulling away, when kids stopped including her, when her aide was reassigned without explanation. She asked me one night, "Mom, am I making people uncomfortable by just existing?" I held her and sobbed. Because how do you explain to a child that the world isn't always cruel because of what you do, but simply because of who you are? The weeks leading up to her exam were filled with tension. Karen had recently emailed the school principal demanding that all students be treated equally during exams, regardless of circumstance, and that no child should receive additional time or assistance unless it is physically impossible for them to function without it. Her words were venom dipped in legality. She was trying to argue Sophie's disability accommodations were favoritism. And disturbingly, the school listened. Meetings were canceled. Emails went unanswered. The special ed coordinator, who once praised Sophie's determination, now spoke to us with rehearsed attachment. I had this sinking feeling we were being iced out, quietly erased. But Sophie? She kept going. Even when her study group was mysteriously disbanded. Even when she was told she'd be testing alone for her comfort. Even when her practice sheets suddenly vanished from her school folder. She didn't complain. She just hugged me the night before and said, "I'm going to show them. I'm going to pass so hard they'll have to notice me." She packed her exam kit like it was a treasure chest, pencils, erasers, her Lucky Charm bracelet, and a note she'd written to herself. "You are smart. You are brave. You belong here." Then she rolled into school with a hopeful smile on her face. She had no idea that behind that fake smile from Karen, behind the forced nods of her teachers, behind the locked doors and hushed emails, a storm was brewing. One designed not to test her strength, but to break it completely. And it did, but not in the way they expected. Because what they didn't know was that this little girl, my little girl, wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter. And this was just the beginning of the fight. It didn't start with yelling or threats. That's the thing about this kind of hatred. It doesn't come at you with fists. It slides in quietly, disguised as concern, dressed up as fairness, and whispered in places where you're not allowed to scream back. It creeps into the cracks of your day-to-day until suddenly you realize you're not welcome anymore. And worse, neither is your child. The first shift was barely noticeable. Sophie's classroom was moved for accessibility reasons, or at least that's what they told us. They claimed it would make it easier for her to get in and out without dealing with the stairs. But the new room was tucked far away in an old corner of the building, smaller, colder, isolated. Her classmates didn't get moved with her. Just Sophie and one new student who barely spoke English. When I asked if they could just install a ramp to keep her with her original group, the vice principal replied with a shrug, "We have to think about what's easiest for the whole class." For the whole class. Not for Sophie. Not for the girl who needed it. That was the first time I felt the air start to freeze. Karen, of course, had plenty to say about it all. One morning, as I was helping Sophie out of the car, Karen walked by briskly with her umbrella and paused just long enough to let the words land. I've been talking to the board about how those new ramps really clash with the brick aesthetic. It's such a shame to see the school looking so industrial. Then she smiled. Tight, controlled, cold. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Your daughter's needs are an inconvenience, and every time we look at her, we're reminded that she's different. But it didn't stop with Karen. Microaggressions began to bloom like mold. Teachers who once praised Sophie's artwork or gave her gold stars on math quizzes suddenly became distant. Her science project, which she'd poured weeks of effort into, was accidentally left out of the hallway display. When she raised her hand, she was often skipped. When she asked for help, she was told, "You've got accommodations, figure it out." Subtle, calculated, and always just soft enough that it couldn't be proven as malice. One day, she came home with tear-stained cheeks, holding her favorite pencil in pieces. "Jacob broke it," she whispered. "He said I get too many chances and that I'm slowing everyone down." I went to the school the next day, ready to raise hell. But the teacher only said, "Kids will be kids," and the principal added, "Let's not turn this into something bigger than it is." But it was something bigger. It was everywhere now. At PDA meetings, I noticed how conversation stopped when I entered the room. When I tried to bring up improvements for accessibility, I was met with phrases like, "We all have challenges and we can't cater to every single case." One mother looked me in the eyes and said, "Honestly, it's not fair that some kids get more time on tests. That's not equality." The others nodded, a full room of parents, agreeing that my child didn't deserve help because help looked like favoritism to them. Even at recess, things were changing. Sophie used to sit at a specific table with her friends, the only one that could fit her chair. One Monday, we arrived to find a new sign had been taped onto it, reserved for staff. The teacher's aide apologized, said she didn't know who put it there, and told Sophie to just sit somewhere else. But there was nowhere else that worked for her. So she ate alone that day. And the next, Karen was behind the scenes orchestrating so much of it. Her ideology was spreading like a sickness. "All kids should be treated the same," she'd say. "If you give one child an extra 30 minutes, you're telling the others they're not good enough." But equality isn't about sameness, it's about access. It's about meeting children where they are and helping them rise. Karen didn't believe in that. She believed in order, in conformity, and she believed my daughter was disturbing the carefully curated symmetry of Belridge Estates. Even our neighbors began to pull away. The Johnsons, who once invited us for BBQs, suddenly forgot to tell us about their son's birthday party. Mrs. Atwood stopped waving when she walked her dog past our house. A family from 2 blocks over returned a plate of cookies Sophie had delivered, untouched, with a sticky note. "We're avoiding allergens. Please don't send food again." But the cookies were store-bought, peanut-free, clearly labeled. The message was loud and clear: stay away. At night, I'd sit in bed next to David, wondering aloud, is it just me? Are we imagining it? And every time, he'd squeeze my hand and say, "No, it's real, and we're going to get through it." But how do you explain to your child that the world can be this cruel, not because of anything she did, but because her very presence makes people uncomfortable? One evening, Sophie asked me, "Mom, do I ruin things?" I dropped the dish I was holding. It shattered against the sink, but I didn't care. I turned around, knelt beside her, and grabbed her hands. "Don't you ever say that. You are not a problem. You are a miracle." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. They'd gotten to her. And just when we thought it couldn't get worse, it did. At the school board meeting that week, Karen stood before the microphone and calmly said, "There have been growing concerns from families about how accommodations for certain students are creating disparities. We believe all students should be held to the same standard. We respectfully request a review of the special needs testing policy." She never said Sophie's name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one objected. No one defended her. No one said, "This is wrong." And that's when I realized they were preparing something bigger, something more deliberate, something final, because the small cruelties were no longer enough for them. They didn't just want my daughter to feel different. They wanted her to disappear. The week before the exam started like any other, rushed mornings, missing shoes, Sophie's crumpled flashcards scattered across the breakfast table. But underneath the routine, something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air, like the quiet stillness before a storm. I chalked it up to exam stress. Sophie had worked herself into a nervous frenzy, constantly checking and rechecking her study schedule. "I want to get everything right, Mom." She told me that Monday, her eyes wide with anxious determination. "Not just for me. I want them to know. I belong here." But I had a growing sense she was preparing for more than just a test. She was bracing for something bigger, the constant weight of judgment, the subtle jabs, the invisible rules she'd learned to read like Braille in this pristine but poisonous place. That Tuesday, I attended the monthly PDA meeting, hoping to bring up a request for extra testing supervision for Sophie. She had a history of muscle spasms during stressful exams, and her occupational therapist recommended brief 5-minute breaks every hour to stretch. It wasn't much, a standard accommodation backed by her IEP, but I knew how these meetings went. You had to fight for what should already be guaranteed. The moment I walked into the room, I noticed Karen seated at the center table, arms folded, her signature, concerned but civil expression already aimed at me. Her presence always shifted the room's energy. People sat straighter, filtered their words, and watched their backs. Karen didn't shout. She didn't threaten. But somehow, she always got her way. I waited until the meeting reached community concerns before raising my hand. I'd like to bring up testing accommodations. I began, keeping my tone steady. My daughter Sophie will be taking the state assessment next week, and as per her IEP, she's entitled to extended time and brief mobility breaks. I'm simply requesting that her proctor is aware and prepared. Before I could finish, Karen raised her hand, slowly, like a judge preparing a sentence. While I respect that every child deserves access to education, she began, I think we need to have a serious conversation about fairness. Many of us have children who are nervous about this test. They don't get special breaks or extra time. What message are we sending to them? Murmurs rippled through the room. One father nodded. A mother glanced at me apologetically and looked away. Karen continued, voice smooth as silk. We're not here to penalize any student, of course, but equity must be balanced. If we continue creating exceptions, we risk compromising the integrity of the assessment itself. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. My daughter doesn't get extra time because she's lucky. I snapped. She gets it because her body works against her. Her brain is brilliant, but her muscles aren't. These accommodations aren't favors, they're her legal rights. Karen tilted her head and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. No one is denying legal rights. But there is also the matter of perception. The other children see her leave the classroom early. They see her testing in a private room. We just want to ensure fairness for all students. Fairness. That word again, twisted and weaponized. I left the meeting humiliated and furious, and more than anything unsettled. The next morning, I found something tucked under our front door, a plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in bold block letters, "Stop pushing. Not everyone wants your daughter here. She's a distraction. Back off, or we'll make sure she's removed permanently." I froze. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words weren't graphic, but the threat was clear. Removed permanently? What did that mean? Expelled? Hurt? Isolated? I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching from the corner of the street. I called the school immediately and reported the letter. I even brought it in, demanded they take it seriously. The principal offered a rehearsed frown and said he'd look into it. But the words didn't sound urgent. They sounded performative, like he was more worried about public perception than a child's safety. They probably didn't mean it literally, he said. It's likely just an upset parent. You know how emotions run high during testing season. I don't care if it's a PDA mom or someone from the board. I said, you have a responsibility to protect my daughter. We'll make sure nothing unusual happens next week, he assured me. And that was that. No follow-up. No investigation. Nothing. That Thursday, I stayed late at the school to pick Sophie up from a tutoring session. As I waited outside the front office, I heard hushed voices echoing from a hallway. Karen's voice was unmistakable, sharp, confident. She's making this harder than it needs to be, she said to someone, a teacher, maybe a staff member. I couldn't see them from where I stood. We can't let one student hold up the entire process. There's a standard. Either she meets it or she doesn't test. The other person replied, I'm not comfortable denying a legal accommodation, Karen interrupted. Legal doesn't mean required in all cases. You know that. And honestly, the fewer distractions that day, the better. The girl has caused enough disruption already. Disruption. That was their word for Sophie. I turned the corner to confront them, but by the time I reached the hallway, it was empty, like they'd melted into the walls. That night, Sophie asked me to quiz her one last time on her vocabulary list. Her eyes were tired, but hopeful. She didn't know any of this was happening. I'd kept it all from her. The letter, the meeting, the hallway conversation. I didn't want her to go into that test thinking the world was out to get her. But inside, I was boiling because I knew something was coming. I didn't know what. I didn't know how. But I could feel it, the storm building, the final move being prepared behind closed doors. Karen wasn't just trying to make a point anymore. She was planning something, and she was using the system to do it. The morning of the exam started with hope. Sophie was up before her alarm, her flashcards clutched tightly in her hands like sacred charms. She had memorized every definition, practiced every math problem twice, and carefully packed her exam kit the night before. 2 sharpened pencils, an eraser, a ruler, and the little note she had written to herself on a pink sticky, "You can do this. You're stronger than they know." She taped it inside her pencil case. It was her armor, her shield. She believed in herself, and so did I. I made her favorite breakfast banana pancakes and hot chocolate, though neither of us could eat much. The air was thick with nerves. She looked up at me, eyes wide, hopeful. "Do you think that'll be nice today?" she asked. I just wanted to go smooth. I just want to prove I belong. "You don't have to prove anything," I told her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "But yes, I think today will be smooth. I think you're going to show them just how bright you are." I didn't believe it. Not really, but I needed her to. I needed her to walk into that building feeling powerful because I couldn't go with her. We left 5 minutes early. I wheeled her down the ramp into the car, and she talked the whole ride about the math section, how she hoped her essay would be about something fun, maybe animals or outer space. I nodded and smiled and kept my eyes on the road, but inside my chest, a storm was starting. Something didn't feel right. I told myself it was just nerves, that she'd come home and tell me how great it went, that everything they'd done to her in the past was behind us now. When we pulled up to the school, Sophie squeezed my hand tight. "Love you," she said, eyes gleaming. "Today's my day." "It is," I said, and watched her roll up the sidewalk alone. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I saw her smile for a long, long time. The exam was scheduled to start at 9 a.m. sharp. Sophie had been told she'd be testing in room 4C, a private space to accommodate her needs. It wasn't unusual. She'd tested there before. The aides knew her routine. Everyone knew her routine. But at 8:45 a.m., just before the test, she felt the nerves hit harder than usual. Her stomach clenched and her legs twitched with tightness. She raised her hand and quietly asked if she could go to the restroom before it started. The aide nodded, a new woman Sophie hadn't seen before, and together they made their way down the corridor toward the accessible bathroom. That bathroom, I'll never forget it. It had no windows, just a single stall, no emergency cord, no interior lock. The hallway leading to it was always quiet during testing days. Sophie went in. The aide waited outside, and then the door shut. The sound of a latch sliding was quiet, almost respectful. Like it was practiced, Sophie didn't think anything was wrong at first. She used the restroom, washed her hands, and then reached for the handle. It didn't turn. She jiggled it. Nothing. She pounded it once, then again. "Excuse me," she called out. "Hello." No answer. She tried again. "Ma'am, I think the door is stuck." Still nothing. The hallway outside was silent. No footsteps. No voices. No aid. She waited. 2 minutes. 5. 10. Then panic set in. She began pounding on the door with both fists. Screaming. Crying. Begging. "Someone please open the door. I have to take my test. It's starting. Please." No one came. The hallway remained quiet. Outside that locked door, the clock hit 9 a.m. The exam began without her. Room 4C remained empty. Students across the school opened their test packets. Pencils scratched across paper. Monitors walked up and down rows. Sophie's desk sat unused. Her chair remained empty. Her name was called once, then never again. Somewhere in the administrative office, a form was marked. Absent did not appear. At 9:42 a.m., I received the call. I was folding laundry when the phone rang, the school's number blinking across the screen. My stomach dropped. I knew that number too well. Mrs. Walker? The voice said. It was the front office secretary. Calm. Emotionless. Yes, we're calling to inform you that Sophie didn't show up for her exam this morning. She was marked absent. The floor beneath me seemed to fall away. What? That's not possible. I dropped her off myself. I watched her go in. She was early. Well, according to the records, she never checked into her testing room. We assumed maybe she got sick or left. Sick? Left? My voice rose. She's in a wheelchair. Where do you think she went? I don't know, ma'am. I can check with the aides. No, I said, grabbing my keys. I'm coming now. I didn't hang up. I just dropped the phone and ran. The rain had started again by the time I pulled into the school. I didn't even bother with an umbrella. I bolted inside, soaked, furious, terrified. I need to speak to someone. I barked at the receptionist. My daughter is missing. Ma'am, we're looking into it. No, you're not. You think she didn't show. I know she came in. And I swear if someone doesn't find her right now, and then I heard it, a faint sound, like tapping, dull, rhythmic. My ears locked onto it. I walked past the office, down the hall, toward the bathrooms. The noise got louder. Bang, bang, bang. Sophie. I screamed. Sophie. Mommy, came a tiny broken voice. I'm here. I'm in here. I slammed my hands on the bathroom door. I'm coming, baby. I'm here. The handle wouldn't budge. I pounded until my knuckles bruised. I screamed for help. Finally, a janitor appeared with keys and opened the door. And there she was, on the floor, crying, red-faced, soaked in her own tears. Her hands were raw from banging. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her pencil case lay broken beside her. She looked up at me and whispered. They left me. I called and called. No one came. I pulled her into my arms and rocked her, sobbing. This wasn't an accident. There was no broken lock. No malfunction. The door had been latched from the outside. Someone did this on purpose. My daughter, a 12-year-old with a disability, was deliberately locked away in a bathroom while her entire school tested without her. She missed the biggest academic milestone of her year because someone wanted to send a message. She was a distraction, an inconvenience, an unwanted presence in their picture-perfect plan. And they punished her for existing. We left the school that day without answers, without apologies, without dignity. I demanded to know who escorted her to the restroom. No one could tell me. I asked for camera footage. I was told the hallway near that bathroom didn't have coverage. I asked why no one thought to check when Sophie didn't appear for her scheduled testing. The teacher said, we assumed she stayed home sick. I showed them my drop-off photo, time-stamped. She was here. And still, no one claimed responsibility, because they all knew. They knew what had happened. They just didn't care. To them, she wasn't a student. She was a problem. And problems get locked away. The worst part wasn't just what happened to Sophie. It was what happened after. The silence, the denial, the twisted justifications, the gaslighting from those who were supposed to protect her. You expect children to make mistakes. You expect systems to have flaws. But what you never expect, what never feels normal, no matter how prepared you think you are, is the cold, calculated cruelty of adults pretending nothing happened while your child sits in front of them broken. The day after the exam, I returned to the school for answers. I didn't make an appointment. I stormed through the front doors with Sophie's broken pencil case in one hand and the official absent slip in the other. My daughter had spent the night curled into herself, refusing to eat, barely speaking, flinching at every sudden sound. That morning, she just whispered, "Please don't make me go back there." My heart shattered, but I had to go. I had to face the people who let this happen. Principal Jennings greeted me with his usual politician smile, wide, rehearsed hello. "Mrs. Walker," he said, clasping his hands together like we were meeting for coffee. "Let's sit down and talk through what happened yesterday." What happened? I repeated. She was locked in a bathroom for over an hour during a state exam, and you're acting like this was a scheduling mix-up. I understand your frustration, he replied, using that fake, corporate tone that always made my blood boil. We're still trying to understand the full sequence of events. At this time, we're not sure who escorted Sophie to the restroom. I slammed the broken pencil case on the desk. You're telling me you don't know who took her? You don't know who shut the door? You don't know why no one checked when she didn't show up for the test? He cleared his throat. It's possible she became overwhelmed and chose to stay in the restroom herself. Some children with high anxiety may freeze up or isolate during high-pressure situations. Maybe she didn't ask for help. I leaned forward. Are you seriously suggesting that my daughter, a child who can barely walk without assistance, who cried herself to sleep, who screamed for someone to come open the door, chose to sit on a cold floor while her entire class tested? I'm not saying that definitively, he said, raising his palms. I'm just offering possibilities. We don't have any hallway footage from that corridor. The cameras in that wing were disabled during recent maintenance. Of course they were. No logs? No aid reports? No accountability? I asked, my voice shaking. Then, who was the woman who walked her there? Where did she go? Why wasn't Sophie reported missing until I called? We're reviewing staff schedules, he said. We're limited in what we can disclose during an ongoing internal review. But rest assured, we followed procedure. Procedure. That word echoed in my head for days. They didn't offer an apology. Not once. Not a single, we're sorry this happened. Just rules. Deflection. Bureaucratic shields. Later that day, I called the district superintendent, left voicemails, sent emails. No response. Then something strange happened. We stopped getting updates altogether. Teachers who used to send Sophie encouraging notes didn't reach out. Her favorite aide was suddenly reassigned. Even the office secretary avoided eye contact when I came to pick up her things. We were being frozen out. Then came the HOA meeting. I didn't attend, but word got back to me. Karen had called an emergency session. She stood before the neighborhood board and residents and said, "We must not let parents weaponize disability. It undermines our schools, our policies, and our children's ability to thrive in a balanced environment." Weaponize disability. She used those words in public. About my daughter. People nodded, took notes, agreed. Karen wasn't just trying to silence us anymore. She was trying to erase us. Make it seem like we were the problem. Like Sophie was the disruption. And the school? They never pushed back. Because they were complicit. 1 week later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a formal apology, not an invitation for a meeting. Just a single typed page stamped by the school board. After a thorough review of the situation surrounding student Sophie Walker's absence from a standardized testing session on March 22nd, we have found no evidence of intentional misconduct or procedural violations. We believe the incident may have stemmed from student anxiety and will be considered closed unless further documentation is submitted. Please contact our district representative if you wish to pursue educational alternatives. That was it. A polite dismissal. They blamed her. They absolved themselves. And they offered us the option to leave. Sophie read the letter before I could hide it. She didn't say a word. Just walked into her room, curled up in bed, and shut the door. She stopped speaking for 3 days. Stopped drawing. Stopped reading. Stopped smiling. She used to love practicing her speech for class. Now she was silent, like her voice didn't belong in this world anymore. We scheduled therapy. Her doctor said it was acute stress trauma. She's internalizing shame, the therapist explained. She's starting to believe she did something wrong. She hadn't. She had done everything right, but the system had chosen to break her, and now it was trying to pretend she was never whole to begin with. I sat outside her bedroom that night, listening to her breath, remembering how excited she'd been just 1 week earlier, remembering her smile when she packed that pink sticky note into her pencil case. You can do this. You're stronger than they know. They tried to prove she wasn't. They tried to lock her away, then lock the truth behind red tape. But they didn't realize something important. Sophie wasn't alone. And I wasn't going to stay quiet. This wasn't over. They thought we would go away, that we would shrink back into our corner, ashamed and beaten, too exhausted to push back. They were wrong. I may have been broken when I held my daughter in my arms outside that bathroom door, but something else rose inside me too, something fierce, primal, and unshakable. They didn't just fail Sophie. They erased her. They locked away her dignity, her effort, her identity, and for that, I was ready to burn their whole wall of silence to the ground. The morning after the board's insulting letter arrived, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Not to complain, not to vent, but to fight. And I started with what they feared most: documentation. Every phone call, every email, every interaction since the day Sophie started at Belridge, I pulled records. I dug up the IEPs, the confirmation emails from teachers about her accommodations, the drop-off photo from test morning. I found every time her testing location had been changed without consent. I even recovered a voicemail from the week prior from her old aide who said she had been quietly moved to a different classroom with no explanation. That alone raised red flags. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to parents I'd met over the years, quietly at first. Some said they had noticed things too. A few had children with mild learning disabilities who had been phased out of programs without cause. One mother whispered to me on the phone, "They made my son feel like a burden." I pulled him out last year, but I didn't want to say anything. You know how they are. I did know. I knew exactly how they were. The more I dug, the more patterns emerged. Reports of accommodations denied. Private aides mysteriously replaced. Students with differences quietly redirected to alternative campuses. None of it was public. None of it reached headlines. Because no one had ever stood up and shouted loud enough. Until now, I contacted a civil rights attorney, someone who specialized in education law and ADA violations. Her name was Maya Lynn, and from the first 5 minutes of our call, I knew I had found an ally. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't question. When I finished, she said, "We're not just looking at negligence. We're looking at a coordinated exclusion. This isn't just about your daughter. This is systemic." Maya helped me draft a formal complaint to the school district's Equity and Inclusion Office. We also began preparing for the possibility of a federal case, a Section 5 for an ADA violation. I expected hesitation from the district. What I didn't expect was the full force of retaliation that followed. Within days, rumors began to circulate that I was fabricating drama, that Sophie had locked herself in for attention, that I was trying to sue the school for money. Anonymous emails began flooding my inbox, telling me to drop it or we'd regret it. Someone left a dead rat on our porch, wrapped in a school testing schedule, stapled shut. I reported everything to the local police. They took the report. Nothing happened. Sophie became even more withdrawn. She overheard a voicemail where someone called her a liability, and she asked me if that meant she shouldn't go to school anymore. It broke me all over again. But I told her something I needed to believe myself. Being inconvenient to the wrong people doesn't mean you're wrong. It means they're scared of what you represent. And she did represent something. She was the proof that their perfect system was a lie, that behind their sparkling newsletters and staged assemblies, they were failing the very children who needed them most. One night, in desperation and rage, I sat down and wrote everything, every detail, every name, every incident, and I posted it on a local parents' forum. It went viral within hours. Comments poured in, messages of support, other parents finally breaking their silence. This happened to my niece last year. My son was denied testing help too. I always felt something was off at that school. Then something changed. A local education reporter from Channel 4 News reached out. She wanted to interview me. I hesitated at first, afraid of the blowback. But then I looked at Sophie sitting silently at the window, watching the world pass her by, and I said yes. We filmed the interview at our kitchen table. I spoke carefully but truthfully. I showed them the letter, the testing photo, Sophie's therapy notes, the pink sticky note, her broken pencil case. I told them about the silence, the cover-up, the dead rat, about how A child was locked in a bathroom during a state exam and the school blamed her. When the story aired, it shook the entire town. Neighbors who once turned away now left flowers at our door. One teacher, anonymously, sent me copies of emails proving that Karen had pressured staff to minimize accommodation requests. A retired school board member emailed me, saying, "Thank you for speaking up. We were wrong for letting her hold so much power for so long." Karen went silent. The school released a vague public statement about reviewing procedures. The district superintendent finally called me, not to apologize, but to offer a restorative conversation and to move forward with dignity. I declined, because this wasn't over. Maya filed a formal civil suit. We were going public. Sophie's case became the center of a statewide conversation on how schools handle invisible disabilities and how HOAs and school politics intersect in dangerously quiet ways. And through it all, Sophie slowly began to reawaken. She watched herself on the news. She saw people standing with her. She received letters from other kids saying, "You're so brave, and you help me feel less alone." She even started drawing again, her first sketch a picture of a lion with glasses and wheels, roaring at a line of tiny gray buildings. She titled it Still Standing, because she was. They tried to lock her away. They tried to shame her into silence. But instead, she became the storm that cracked open their perfect little lie, and I became the mother they never expected, the one who didn't flinch, who didn't back down, who didn't stop. Because when you mess with a child's dignity, especially one who's already had to fight for every ounce of respect, you awaken something no system can contain. Justice wasn't a dream anymore. It was coming, and I was going to lead it there. Just when I thought I had uncovered every layer of the rot that had infected Bell Ridge, the final crack in the wall came from the one place I least expected, the inside. It started with a strange email. No subject, no sender name, just a string of numbers and a single attachment. I hovered my mouse over it, heart thudding. The message read, "You didn't hear this from me, but you deserve to know what really happened." Inside the attachment were screenshots, grainy at first but damning in content. A text thread, Karen's name at the top. Beneath it, words so cruel, so calculated, I had to reread them 3 times just to believe they were real. Karen H. Honestly, I'm done with the pity circus. Every year it's the same: extra time, private room, special treatment. Unknown recipient. It's in her IEP, Karen. We can't override federal law. Karen H. She's faking half of it. You think she needs that much help? Please. Karen H. Here's what you do. Send her to the private wing. Lock the bathroom. Let her miss the test. That'll teach them about entitlement. Karen H. Don't worry. We'll cover it with an anxiety excuse. It works every time. My fingers shook as I read the last line. The casual tone. The entitlement. The cruelty. She wasn't just trying to exclude Sophie. She had orchestrated her humiliation. This wasn't negligence. This was sabotage. I sat there in stunned silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I scrolled through the texts again, each message like a dagger. This was the evidence we needed, the undeniable truth, a confession in Karen's own words. But who sent it? Attached below the screenshots was one final message. I can't let my name be tied to this. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. She's just a little girl. Whoever they were brave, and they had just blown this case wide open. Within an hour, I forwarded the screenshots to Maya, our attorney. Her response came back in all caps. This changes everything. We took the evidence straight to the district, but by the time we walked into the administrative office that afternoon, the story had already leaked. Because while Maya filed motions, I sent the screenshots to Channel 4 News. The anchor who had first interviewed me called it a bombshell revelation. Within hours, it hit the evening segment. Karen's name trended on local Twitter. Parents at Bell Ridge were outraged, not just because of what she did to Sophie, but because she had done it while smiling in their faces. People who had once defended her emailed the PDA, demanding her removal. Former teachers came forward with new testimony. One even admitted, We were always told to minimize accommodation requests. We just didn't know how far it would go. Karen didn't show up at the HOA meeting that week. In fact, she didn't show up anywhere. According to one neighbor, she packed up and left town 2 nights later. Left her house dark, mailbox full, lawn uncut. Unheard of for someone who once fined a resident for leaving up holiday lights 3 days past the deadline. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just gone. The principal didn't last much longer. When confronted by reporters, he gave a statement that made everything worse. I wasn't aware of the conversations in question, but if they did occur, I trust my staff had the best intentions. The district placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. Within the week, he resigned. The school board scrambled to save face. They issued a formal apology, the first we had ever received, stating their deep regret over the incident and promising a renewed commitment to inclusivity and lawful practices. But to us, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. But to Sophie, it meant something. Because now the world knew. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't weak. She wasn't making it up. She had been locked in that bathroom not by accident, not by neglect, but by design. And now the people responsible were falling one by one. For the first time in weeks, Sophie smiled again. A real one. Not forced, not afraid. We sat on the couch together watching the news, and she whispered, "They can't ignore me now, right?" "No, baby," I said, pulling her close. "Not anymore." The community turned. Parents who had once been silent organized a protest outside the school gates. Students wore purple, Sophie's favorite color, and carried signs that read, "Access is a right and no more silence." A petition to remove the entire HOA board gathered thousands of signatures. Karen's name was now synonymous with exclusion and cruelty. One small girl had brought down an empire of silence. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with truth, and a voice too powerful to be locked away. The day of the HOA hearing felt electric. Word had spread across Belridge like wildfire after the leaked texts, the ones that exposed Karen's true intentions, written in her own words. Parents, reporters, and community members all buzzed with anticipation. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering their discomfort behind closed doors. They were speaking up. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. And we were finally ready to give them both. I arrived early, wearing the same jacket I'd worn the day Sophie was locked away. A reminder to myself that this wasn't over until accountability had a name and a face. Sophie sat beside me in her wheelchair, her eyes calm but firm. She had insisted on coming, even though I'd offered to go alone. "They need to see me," she said, "not just hear about me." She was right. This wasn't just my battle anymore. It was hers, and she was ready to own it. The room was packed. Folding chairs filled the HOA meeting hall, and people were lined up against the walls. Even the local press had shown up again. Cameras ready, lenses trained on the podium. The board sat at a long oak table, faces rigid, defensive. But Karen's seat, the one at the center, where she had once wielded her influence like a crown, sat empty. I walked to the front as the meeting began, Maya Lynn at my side, a folder of printed screenshots in her hand. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. The room quieted as I stepped up to the mic. "My name is Olivia Walker." I began, voice clear, steady. "You all know who I am. But more importantly, you know who my daughter is. Her name is Sophie. She's 12 years old. She has cerebral palsy. And she is a student who was intentionally locked in a bathroom during her state exam, not by accident, not by miscommunication, but by deliberate action. Action encouraged and directed by the very person who used to sit in that chair. I held up the first printed text. Karen's words, black and white, let her miss the test. That'll teach them about entitlement. Gasps filled the room. I continued, reading each line slowly, deliberately. "We'll cover it with an anxiety excuse. It works every time. She's faking half of it. Lock the bathroom." People shifted in their seats. Some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. No one interrupted. Not even the board. "This isn't about misjudgment," I said. "It's about cruelty. And it's about how we, as a community, allowed it." For years, we let one voice dominate, silence, manipulate. But today, that ends. And then I stepped aside, and Sophie rolled forward. For a heartbeat, the entire room went still. She looked so small beneath the harsh lights, but her voice, when it came, cut through the silence like a knife. "My name is Sophie Walker," she said, gripping the microphone with one hand, the other resting gently on her lap. "I'm not here to make you feel sorry for me. I'm here because I studied really hard for that test. I practiced for weeks. I even made flashcards. I wanted to prove that I was smart enough, that I could be enough. But someone decided I didn't deserve that chance." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I heard them say I was a distraction, that I was faking, that I didn't belong. But I'm here to tell you I do belong. I am not invisible. I never was. You just didn't want to see me." A woman in the back began to clap. Then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the flood of something she hadn't felt in months, validation. Karen finally walked in, late, avoiding eye contact, hoping to control what little narrative remained. But it was too late. When she took her seat, the cameras pivoted toward her, and every face in the room was already turned. One parent stood and shouted, "Resign!" Another added, "How dare you call yourself a leader?" And from the back, "Shame on you." Karen tried to speak, tried to defend herself, but the damage was done. The texts were real. The silence was over. And the people who had once followed her were no longer afraid. That night, the HOA board held a vote. Karen Harwood was permanently removed from all leadership roles in Belridge Estates. She was banned from serving on any future committees. Her name was stripped from community records. An official apology was issued, signed by every remaining board member. And that was just the beginning. The school district settled our lawsuit. They admitted procedural failure. They admitted emotional harm. They agreed to rewrite their entire disability protocol with input from families like ours. Sophie's name wouldn't just be a cautionary tale. It would be the foundation of new protections for other kids who didn't look, move, or learn like everyone else. We won the case. But more than that, we changed the system. Sophie returned to school weeks later, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And when she did, she was met with a hallway full of clapping students. They cheered. They waved handmade signs. And one read, in bold purple ink, "You are not invisible." She smiled. And this time it stayed, because the world saw her now, and they would never look away again. It's been almost a year since that stormy morning. The day they tried to lock my daughter away, not just behind a door, but behind silence, shame, and fear. A year since the system failed her in the most brutal, calculated way. And somehow, despite everything they did to crush her spirit, Sophie rose. Not all at once, not without pain, but slowly, steadily she began to heal. Healing isn't linear. It came in tiny moments. A half smile at the dinner table. The day she picked up her sketchbook again. The first time she asked to go back to the library, she had to relearn trust, not in herself, because that had never truly gone, but in the world around her. In adults, in institutions, in the belief that her voice mattered. And now, Sophie is a force. She started small, recording little video messages for other kids who felt different. "You're not weird," she said in one. "You're wonderful. You don't need to hide." Those videos went viral. Parents started reaching out. Then teachers. Then school districts. What began as a whisper turned into something powerful, a voice that refused to be ignored. Sophie was invited to speak at a statewide education summit. She stood on stage, legs trembling, voice steady, and told a room full of adults what it felt like to be forgotten on purpose. She got a standing ovation. Afterwards, a little boy in a wheelchair rolled up to her and said, "You made me feel brave." That night, Sophie cried in my arms, not from pain, but from something deeper, finally feeling seen. As for me, I couldn't go back to normal, not after what we endured. I left my job and started a local support group for special needs families. What I thought would be 5 or 6 parents quickly grew into dozens. We meet every week. We talk, cry, share resources, and fight, not just for our own children, but for every child being quietly pushed aside. We started an initiative called Invisible No More, advocating for equity in education, pushing for policy change, offering legal support to families who can't afford it. We meet with legislators. We speak at schools. We make noise, the kind that echoes into places where silence once ruled. People sometimes ask me, "Do you wish it had never happened?" I pause before answering, because what they did to Sophie was unforgivable. It still keeps me up some nights. But I also know this: they underestimated her. They underestimated us. They thought if they shut a door, that would be the end, but it was just the beginning. They tried to silence her, but now her voice helps thousands. And the girl they tried to hide? She's changing the world. One story, one step, one truth at a time. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, made you cry, or reminded you of something you've seen or lived through, don't let it end here. What happened to Sophie wasn't just one isolated incident. It's happening in communities all over, hidden behind locked doors, buried under paperwork, and silenced by people in power who think no one will speak up. But we are speaking up, and we're not stopping. So, if you believe that no child should be punished for being different, if you believe every voice matters, no matter how quiet, no matter how small, then help us make noise. Subscribe to our channel, HOA Denied Access, where we uncover real stories of injustice, power abuse, and courage in the face of cruelty. Speech balloon comment below and share your own experience. We read every story. Loudspeakers share this video because you never know who needs to hear it. And remember, when communities try to erase the most vulnerable, that's exactly where we need to stand the loudest. You are not invisible. Not anymore.